The autumn sun was setting over Georgetown as Dr. Maya Washington guided her Honda Civic through the historic streets. She had just finished another long day at CIA headquarters in Langley, where she had led a critical briefing about national security. Despite her high-ranking position, Maya preferred to drive an ordinary car. She believed in staying humble and blending in, skills that had helped her rise to become one of the most powerful intelligence officers in America. The streets were quiet that evening. Maya's mind was still processing the sensitive information from the day's meetings when she noticed the flashing blue and red lights in her rearview mirror. She checked her speedometer. She hadn't been speeding. With the practiced calm of a seasoned intelligence officer, she pulled over to the curb, keeping her hands visible on the steering wheel. Sergeant James Barrett stepped out of his police cruiser, adjusting his belt as he walked toward Maya's car. He had been a cop for 15 years and prided himself on his ability to spot trouble. When he first saw the Honda, something just didn't feel right to him. The driver had rolled through a stop sign. At least, that's what he would write in his report. License and registration, Barrett said sharply, shining his flashlight directly into Maya's face, even though there was still plenty of daylight. His tone changed instantly when he saw her, a well-dressed black woman in her early 40s. His eyes narrowed with suspicion. Maya reached slowly for her purse. Of course, officer. Her voice was steady and professional as she handed over her documents. Along with her driver's license, she also provided her government ID, a high-level security badge that most police officers would recognize and respect. Barrett studied the IDs with growing skepticism. He held the government badge up to the light, turning it over in his hands. "This is a pretty good fake," he said, his lips curling into a smirk. "One of the better ones I've seen." "I assure you, Officer Barrett," Maya said, reading his nameplate, "that ID is authentic. You can easily verify it by." "Step out of the vehicle," Barrett interrupted, his hand moving to rest on his gun. "Now." Maya took a deep breath. She had faced down terrorists and hostile foreign agents, but this situation required a different kind of courage. She opened her door slowly and stepped out, her heels clicking on the pavement. Several passers-by had stopped to watch, some already pulling out their phones to record. "I'm going to call this in," Barrett announced, holding Maya's IDs like they were evidence in a major crime. "Don't move." He walked back to his patrol car, speaking into his radio with a satisfied expression. Maya stood perfectly still, her mind racing through protocols and procedures. She knew exactly who to contact, but doing so would escalate the situation to levels Officer Barrett couldn't imagine. She had spent years building relationships with foreign intelligence agencies, coordinating covert operations, and protecting American interests worldwide. Now she was being treated like a criminal because of one officer's prejudices. A few minutes later, Barrett returned with a triumphant look on his face. "Dispatch can't verify these credentials," he announced loudly, playing to his audience of onlookers. "You're in serious trouble here. Impersonating a federal officer is a felony." Maya watched as he called for backup, her expression composed but her eyes alert. She had noticed at least 3 people live-streaming the encounter. By tomorrow, this would probably be all over social media, another video of police harassment. But this one would have a very different ending. "Last chance," Barrett said, pulling out his handcuffs. "Want to tell me where you really got these IDs?" Maya finally reached for her phone. "Actually, Officer Barrett, I'd like to make one quick call. You see, I have a meeting with the president tomorrow morning, and I need to let my staff know I might be slightly delayed." Barrett laughed. "Sure, and I'm the Secretary of Defense. Put the phone down and turn around." As Maya pressed a single button on her phone, she almost felt sorry for what was about to happen to Officer Barrett's career. Almost. Through the growing crowd of spectators, 3 black SUVs were already turning onto the street, their engines purring with government authority. The first act of this drama was about to end, but the real story was just beginning. 2 police cars arrived with their sirens wailing, adding to the chaos of the scene. Officer Barrett stood taller now, confident with the backup. The growing crowd of onlookers had formed a loose circle around Maya's Honda, their phones recording every moment. The evening air felt thick with tension. "I got a possible federal impersonator here," Barrett announced to his arriving colleagues, Officers Chen and Rodriguez. He held up Maya's IDs like trophies. "Subject claims to be CIA, but dispatch couldn't verify," pretty sophisticated fake IDs. Officer Chen, a younger cop with 5 years on the force, took the IDs from Barrett. Her eyes widened slightly as she examined them. Something about these credentials looked extremely authentic. She had done a rotation with the Diplomatic Protection Unit and had seen similar high-level clearance badges before. "Sergeant," Chen said quietly, "maybe we should." "Call for a federal response unit," Barrett interrupted. "Already done. We'll let them sort out this fraud." He turned back to Maya, who remained perfectly calm. "Until then, we're going to have to detain you." Maya's phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced at it briefly, noting the message. "TAMSEN wrote, 3 minutes yes." She allowed herself a small smile. "Officers," Maya said, her voice clear and professional, "I understand you're doing your job. But I strongly suggest you verify my credentials through proper channels before this situation escalates further." She looked directly at Officer Chen. "The number for CIA security authentication is right there on the back of my badge." Barrett stepped closer, his face reddening. "Ma'am, put the phone down now. You're only making this worse for yourself. I've seen plenty of people try to fake government credentials, but coming up with a whole CIA story? That's a new one." The crowd had grown larger. Someone in the back shouted, "She's not doing anything wrong." Another voice called out, "This is harassment." The officers shifted uncomfortably, except for Barrett, who seemed energized by the audience. "Sergeant," Officer Rodriguez said, "maybe we should call the number." "We're doing this by the book," Barrett snapped. "No shortcuts. For all we know, that number's as fake as these IDs." He turned to Maya again. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Maya remained still, her expression neutral but her eyes intense. "Officer Barrett, your body camera is on, correct? I want to make sure there's a clear record of me stating that I am a senior federal official and that you are refusing to follow proper identification protocols." Barrett's face flushed darker. "That's it. You're under arrest for impersonating a federal officer and resisting arrest." He reached for his handcuffs. The crowd grew louder, more phones appeared in the air, and the scene was growing more tense by the second. Officer Chen looked increasingly worried, while Rodriguez kept scanning the street, noticing the black SUVs approaching in the distance. "Last warning," Barrett said, taking a step toward Maya. "Turn around and—" The sound of screeching tires cut him off. 3 black government SUVs surged around the corner, moving with precision to form a triangle around the scene. Before Barrett could react, the vehicles had stopped and their doors were opening. Men and women in suits emerged swiftly, their movements coordinated and purposeful. They wore earpieces and carried themselves with unmistakable federal authority. The crowd fell silent, phones still recording as the scene transformed. A distinguished-looking man in his 60s stepped forward from the lead vehicle. Deputy Director Thompson of the CIA walked directly toward the group of officers, his credentials already extended. "Good evening, officers," Thompson said, his voice carrying easily across the now quiet street. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding about Dr. Washington's credentials." He looked at Barrett, whose face had lost its color. "A rather serious misunderstanding." Maya hadn't moved, but now there was a subtle shift in her posture. The power dynamic had changed, and everyone could feel it. The crowd watched in fascination as more federal agents created a perimeter around the scene. Barrett's hands fell to his sides, the handcuffs forgotten. Officer Chen had already stepped back, while Rodriguez looked like he wished he could disappear entirely. The night had just gotten much longer for Sergeant James Barrett, and his troubles were only beginning. Deputy Director Thompson's presence had transformed the Georgetown street into what felt like a secure federal zone. The crowd of onlookers, still recording with their phones, had been pushed back by CIA security personnel. The blue and red lights from the police cars now mixed with the subtle flashing of government vehicles, creating an otherworldly atmosphere in the growing darkness. "Sergeant Barrett," Thompson said, his voice carrying the weight of decades of authority, "I'd like those credentials back." He held out his hand, not as a request but as a command. Barrett's fingers trembled slightly as he handed over Maya's IDs. The same documents he had confidently declared fake just minutes ago now felt like burning evidence of his mistake. Thompson examined them briefly before returning them to Maya with a respectful nod. "Dr. Washington," Thompson addressed Maya, deliberately using her title. "I apologize for this interruption to your evening. The President asked me to remind you about tomorrow's National Security Council meeting. He's particularly interested in your assessment of the situation we discussed today." Maya nodded professionally, though there was a hint of satisfaction in her eyes. "Thank you, John. Please let him know I'll have the full briefing ready." She turned to Barrett, who was starting to understand just how badly he had misjudged the situation. "Officer Barrett, I believe you were about to arrest me for fraudulent credentials." Barrett's face had turned an unhealthy shade of pale. Officer Chen had backed away several steps, while Rodriguez was suddenly very interested in his shoes. The growing number of federal agents around them made the three police officers look increasingly isolated and small. I was following standard procedure," Barrett stammered, his earlier confidence evaporating like morning dew. "The dispatch couldn't verify." "Because you called the wrong department," Thompson cut in sharply. "Dr. Washington's level of security clearance is above what your local dispatch could possibly verify, a fact that's clearly stated on her credentials, which you chose to ignore." One of the CIA agents approached Thompson and whispered something in his ear. Thompson's expression darkened. "It seems videos of this incident are already trending on social media. #JorgeTown'sDaladi is gaining traction." Maya checked her phone, raising an eyebrow at what she saw. The live streams had caught everything, from Barrett's initial aggressive approach to the dramatic arrival of the CIA team. Comments were pouring in by the thousands. "Sir," Officer Chen stepped forward, addressing Thompson, "I tried to suggest we verify the credentials through the proper channels, but—" "Save it for the internal investigation," Thompson replied firmly. He turned to address all three officers. "This incident will be reported to your superiors, the mayor's office, and the Department of Justice. Dr. Washington is not just any federal employee. She handles matters of national security that affect the lives of every American citizen." The crowd had grown larger despite the security perimeter, and snippets of their conversations floated through the air. "She's CIA leadership. Did you see his face when the feds showed up? This is going viral." Barrett looked like a man watching his career crumble before his eyes. "Dr. Washington," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I apologize for my behavior. If I had just—" "Your apology would mean more," Maya interrupted calmly, "if it had come before Deputy Director Thompson arrived." She straightened her jacket and checked her watch. "Now, if we're finished here, I have a rather important report to finish for the President." Thompson nodded to his team, and they began to move with practiced efficiency. Two agents opened the door to one of the SUVs for Maya, while others maintained the security perimeter. "Sergeant Barrett," Thompson said as Maya prepared to leave, "expect a call from the FBI's Civil Rights Division tomorrow morning. They'll be very interested in reviewing your record of traffic stops and arrests. Dr. Washington's experience tonight suggests this may not be an isolated incident." Maya paused before entering the vehicle, looking back at Barrett one last time. "Officer Barrett, I sincerely hope this experience teaches you something valuable. The next person you profile might not have the CIA to call, but they deserve the same respect and presumption of innocence that you denied me tonight." As the government vehicles prepared to depart, Barrett stood frozen in place, watching his world shift on its axis. The night's events would soon become a nationwide conversation about police conduct, racial profiling, and justice. And it had all started with a traffic stop that should never have happened. The next morning, the Georgetown incident was everywhere. News channels played the viral videos on repeat, social media exploded with hashtags, and Dr. Maya Washington's name was trending nationwide. But Maya herself was exactly where she needed to be, in a secure briefing room at the White House, focusing on matters of national security. Meanwhile, across town at the Metropolitan Police Department headquarters, Sergeant James Barrett sat stiffly in a hard plastic chair outside the Chief of Police's office. The morning newspapers lay scattered on a nearby table, their headlines screaming, "CIA Deputy Director racially profiled by local police," and "Georgetown traffic stop sparks national outrage." Barrett's phone hadn't stopped buzzing since dawn. Journalists, old colleagues, and even his own family members were trying to reach him. But department policy was clear. He couldn't talk to anyone while under investigation. His badge and gun had been taken upon arrival, and his uniform felt strangely heavy on his shoulders. "Sergeant Barrett," the chief's secretary called. They're ready for you." Inside the office, Barrett found not just Chief Williams, but also two FBI agents, a representative from the mayor's office, and a stern-looking woman who introduced herself as the department's new diversity and inclusion coordinator. The room felt smaller than he remembered it. "Sit down, Barrett," Chief Williams said, his face grave. "Do you have any idea what kind of storm you've created?" He picked up a remote and turned on the office TV, where news anchors were discussing the incident. "Sir, I was following what I thought was proper procedure," Barrett began, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Proper procedure?" The FBI agent, Johnson, leaned forward. "We've reviewed your body cam footage. You ignored clear security markings on a federal ID, refused to follow verification protocols, and escalated a routine traffic stop into a potential civil rights violation, all while being recorded by multiple civilians." The diversity coordinator, Dr. Patricia Lee, opened a thick folder. "We've also taken the liberty of reviewing your past record, Sergeant. Over the past 5 years, 78% of your traffic stops involved minorities. Care to explain that statistic?" Barrett felt sweat forming on his forehead. The numbers seemed to hang in the air, impossible to explain away. For the first time in his career, he had no defense ready. Meanwhile, at the White House, Maya was finishing her security briefing when the president himself brought up the previous night's events. "Dr. Washington," the president said as advisors cleared the room, "I saw the videos. It's causing quite a stir out there. How would you like us to handle this?" Maya straightened in her chair. "Mr. President, with your permission, I'd like to use this incident constructively. We have an opportunity to create real change in police training and accountability." Back at police headquarters, Barrett's meeting had turned into an hours-long review of his entire career. Every complaint, every questionable stop, every use of force incident was laid bare. The pattern was undeniable, even to him. "Here's what's going to happen," Chief Williams finally said. "You're suspended without pay pending a full investigation. You'll undergo comprehensive bias training, psychological evaluation, and community service. If, and that's a big if, you complete all requirements satisfactorily, we'll reassess your future with the department." Just then, a knock at the door interrupted them. The chief's secretary entered with an urgent message. "Sir, the CIA Deputy Director's office is on line 1. Dr. Washington would like to speak with all of you." The room fell silent as the chief put the call on speakerphone. Maya's voice filled the room, calm and professional as ever. "Chief Williams, Agent Johnson, Dr. Lee," she acknowledged each person. "I understand you're meeting with Sergeant Barrett right now. I'd like to propose something that might benefit everyone involved." Barrett sat up straighter, his heart pounding. Was she about to end his career completely? "Instead of just punishing Officer Barrett," Maya continued, "I suggest we use this incident as a catalyst for department-wide change. I'm willing to work with your training division to develop new protocols for credential verification and bias prevention. Sometimes, the best way to fix a broken system is to help rebuild it from the inside." The others in the room exchanged surprised looks. Barrett felt something he hadn't expected, a glimmer of hope, mixed with deep shame and a dawning understanding of the responsibility he now carried. The incident that could have ended his career might instead become the turning point that transformed it, and possibly his entire department, for the better. 2 weeks after the Georgetown incident, the Metropolitan Police Department's largest training room was packed to capacity. Officers from every precinct sat in rows, their attention focused on the woman standing at the podium. Dr. Maya Washington had traded her usual business attire for a simple blazer and pants, but her presence commanded the same respect it did in the White House Situation Room. "I'm not here to shame you," Maya began, her voice carrying to the back of the room. "I'm here because what happened 2 weeks ago revealed problems that go beyond one traffic stop or one officer's actions." In the back row, Sergeant Barrett sat quietly, his uniform replaced by civilian clothes. As part of his rehabilitation program, he was required to attend all of Maya's training sessions. He noticed how other officers glanced at him, some with sympathy, others with judgment. "Many of you have probably wondered about my actual role at the CIA," Maya continued, clicking to the next slide. "With the director's permission, I can share some details today. Not about classified operations, but about my journey to becoming the highest-ranking black woman in the agency's history. The room grew even quieter. On the screen behind her, a younger Maya appeared in various photos. Graduating from Harvard, receiving commendations, meeting with world leaders. Each image told part of a story that challenged every assumption Barrett had made that night. I briefed 3 presidents, coordinated operations in 47 countries, and managed intelligence networks that have saved countless American lives. Maya said, letting the information sink in. But 2 weeks ago, none of that mattered during a simple traffic stop. To Officer Barrett, I was just another black woman who couldn't possibly own legitimate government credentials. Barrett felt dozens of eyes turn toward him. His face burned, but he forced himself to maintain eye contact with Maya. He owed her that much. However, Maya continued, surprising everyone. Sergeant Barrett's reaction that night wasn't unique. During my 20-year career, I've been questioned, doubted, and challenged more times than I can count. The only difference this time was that everyone saw it happen. She clicked to a new slide showing statistics about racial profiling in traffic stops nationwide. These numbers tell a story that many of you might find uncomfortable, but discomfort can be the first step toward change. In the middle rows, Officer Chen, who had been at the scene that night, raised her hand. Dr. Washington, how do we balance legitimate security concerns with avoiding bias? Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. Maya nodded appreciatively at the question. That's exactly why I'm here. Over the next 6 weeks, we'll be implementing new protocols for credential verification, but more importantly, we'll be addressing the underlying assumptions that affect your split-second decisions. She then revealed something that made the room buzz with surprise. The CIA deals with deception every day. We're trained to spot fake documents, detect lies, and question everything. But we're also trained to follow proper procedures every single time, regardless of what we think we know about the person in front of us. Barrett found himself taking notes, something he hadn't done in a training session in years. Each word Maya spoke seemed to dismantle another brick in the wall of prejudice he had built over his career. Starting next week, Maya announced, your department will be the first in the country to implement a new training program developed jointly by the CIA and FBI. You'll learn the same verification protocols we use in the intelligence community, along with advanced bias recognition and prevention techniques. She paused, making eye contact with various officers around the room. But today, I want to tell you my full story, not just as a CIA deputy director, but as a black woman in America who has faced the same prejudices as the citizens you're sworn to protect. The next hour was transformative. Maya shared experiences that made hardened officers shift uncomfortably in their seats. She described situations that mirrored their own interactions with civilians, but from the other side. With each story, the gap between the police and the people they served seemed to narrow. For Barrett, each word was both a rebuke and a revelation. The woman he had tried to arrest was now teaching him and his fellow officers how to be better at their jobs, and better human beings. The irony wasn't lost on him, but neither was the opportunity for redemption. 1 month into the new training program, the changes at the Metropolitan Police Department were becoming visible. The incident that had started with Sergeant Barrett's prejudiced traffic stop had grown into something much bigger than anyone expected. News crews gathered outside the police headquarters, where Maya Washington was about to give her first press conference since the viral video. The partnership between the CIA and local law enforcement is groundbreaking, Maya explained to the crowd of reporters. She stood confidently at the podium, with Chief Williams and several other officials behind her. In just 4 weeks, we've seen a 40% decrease in complaints about credential verification stops. In the back of the room, Barrett sat watching. He looked different now, humbled, but also more aware. The mandatory counseling sessions and bias training had opened his eyes to patterns in his behavior he had never noticed before. Today, he was scheduled to speak publicly for the first time about his role in the incident. And now, Maya announced, I'd like to introduce Sergeant James Barrett, who has become an unexpected partner in this initiative. Barrett walked to the podium, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted the microphone. Camera flashes filled the room as reporters recognized the officer from the viral video. He took a deep breath and began speaking. A month ago, I made a mistake that could have ended my career. More importantly, I participated in a system of bias that has hurt countless citizens, Barrett said, his voice growing stronger with each word. Working with Dr. Washington has shown me how deep these prejudices run and how much damage they can do. The reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks as Barrett continued. He shared specific examples from his 20 years on the force, admitting to patterns of racial profiling he had previously defended as good police work. His honesty was raw and uncomfortable, but necessary. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Officer Chen was putting her new training to use during a routine traffic stop. She carefully followed the new protocols Maya had helped implement, treating the driver with respect while efficiently verifying their credentials. The driver, a young black man, noticed the difference from his previous experiences with law enforcement. Back at the press conference, Maya returned to the podium. Change doesn't happen overnight, she acknowledged. But what we're seeing in this department could serve as a model for police forces across the country. When law enforcement officers understand their own biases and have better tools to do their jobs, everyone benefits. She shared statistics from the first month of the program. Complaints were down, community trust was improving, and officers reported feeling more confident in their ability to handle complex situations. The reporters were especially interested in the new credential verification system, which had been adapted from CIA protocols. After the press conference, Maya met privately with Barrett in her temporary office at the police headquarters. The room was simple but efficient, much like her office at Langley. "You did well today, Sergeant," Maya said, gesturing for him to sit. "How are you feeling about everything?" Barrett considered the question carefully. "Honestly, I'm still processing it all. Every day in training, I remember something else from my career. Another stop, another assumption I made. It's not easy facing these things about yourself." Maya nodded understanding. "Growth never is, but you become an important part of this program. Other officers listen to you because you've been where they are. You understand the mindset we're trying to change." The conversation was interrupted by a call from the White House. The president had been watching the press conference and wanted to discuss expanding the program nationally. Maya took the call on speakerphone, allowing Barrett to listen as they discussed the future of law enforcement training. As the day ended, Barrett walked to his car in the parking lot. He noticed a black family being helped by one of his fellow officers. The interaction was professional, respectful, and followed all the new protocols. 6 weeks ago, he might not have even noticed the interaction. Now, he saw it as proof that change was possible. His phone buzzed with a text message. It was from his teenage daughter. "Saw you on TV, Dad. Proud of you for trying to make things better." Barrett smiled, feeling for the first time that maybe, just maybe, some good had come from his biggest mistake. 3 months after the Georgetown incident, the Metropolitan Police Department hosted an open house for the community. The event took place in the same street where Maya Washington had once been wrongfully stopped. Now, that location served as a symbol of transformation. Residents from all over the city came to see the changes firsthand. Information booths lined the street, staffed by officers who had completed the new training program. They demonstrated the updated credential verification system and explained how it protected both citizens and police officers from misunderstandings. "This scanner confirms ID in seconds," Officer Chen explained to a group of curious teenagers, showing them the new technology. "It's the same system federal agencies use. No more guessing or assumptions, just clear, accurate information." Sergeant Barrett manned a different booth, one focused on bias recognition and prevention. He had become an unexpected advocate for police reform, traveling to other departments to share his story. Today, he stood beside a large display showing before and after statistics from their department. "These numbers tell the real story," he told visitors, pointing to the charts. "Complaints down by 60%, community satisfaction up by 45%. Response times improved because we're not wasting time on unnecessary stops." Maya Washington arrived at the event wearing casual clothes instead of her usual formal attire. She had just finished a morning of intelligence briefings at Langley, but had made sure to be here for this important milestone. As she walked through the crowd, people recognized her from the news coverage, but their reactions were different now. Instead of seeing her as just the CIA officer who was profiled, they saw her as a catalyst for positive change. Dr. Washington called out a young black girl, maybe 12 years old. "I want to be like you when I grow up. My mom says you helped make our neighborhood safer." Maya knelt down to the girl's level. "What's your name?" "Jasmine," the girl replied confidently. "Well, Jasmine, you can be anything you want to be. And you know what? You're already making things better just by being here today, showing that our community and police can work together." Across the street, Chief Williams was giving interviews to local news stations. The department's transformation had attracted national attention, and other cities were starting to implement similar programs. "The key was admitting we had a problem," the chief explained to reporters. "Dr. Washington didn't just expose our failures, she helped us fix them, and officers like Sergeant Barrett showed that people can change when they're willing to confront their biases." Barrett, overhearing this, felt a complex mix of emotions. His moment of prejudice had become a teaching tool, his mistake transformed into a lesson for others. He watched as his fellow officers interacted naturally with citizens of all backgrounds, using their new training to build trust instead of suspicion. Later that afternoon, Maya and Barrett met at his booth during a quiet moment. It was one of the few times they had spoken directly since the training program began. "I never properly thanked you," Barrett said, his voice sincere. "You could have ended my career. Instead, you helped me become a better officer." Maya studied him thoughtfully. "The easy path would have been to punish you and move on, but that wouldn't have fixed the underlying problems. Real change happens when people like you admit their mistakes and work to correct them." Their conversation was interrupted by Officer Rodriguez, who rushed up with exciting news. "The mayor just announced it. They're expanding the program to all precincts in the city. We're getting full funding for the next 5 years." The celebration that followed brought officers and citizens together, sharing food, stories, and hopes for the future. Children played with police K-9 units while their parents chatted with officers about neighborhood concerns. The barrier of distrust that had existed for so long was finally beginning to crumble. As the sun set over Georgetown, Maya received a text from the CIA director. "Your community program is attracting attention at the highest levels. The president wants to discuss making it a national model. You've turned a moment of discrimination into a movement for change." Maya looked around at the scene before her, officers and citizens talking and laughing together, Barrett teaching a group about bias awareness, Chen demonstrating the new technology to interested residents. This was more than just police reform. It was the beginning of a new relationship between law enforcement and the communities they served. 6 months after the Georgetown incident, Dr. Maya Washington stood before the United States Congress. The Senate hearing room was packed with legislators, media, and citizens who had come to hear her testimony about police reform. The program that had started with one traffic stop had grown into a national movement. "Distinguished members of Congress," Maya began, her voice steady and clear, "what happened to me that night in Georgetown happens to countless Americans every day. The difference is that I had the power to do something about it. Today, I'm here to ensure that every citizen has that same power." In the audience, Sergeant James Barrett sat next to Chief Williams. They had been invited to testify about the program's success in their department. Barrett wore his dress uniform, newly adorned with a community service medal. He listened intently as Maya presented the data from their pilot program. "In just 6 months," Maya continued, showing slides on the large screens, "we've seen a 70% reduction in complaints about racial profiling. Emergency response times have improved by 30% because officers are no longer conducting unnecessary stops. Most importantly, public trust in law enforcement has reached its highest level in a decade." Senator Martinez leaned forward. "Dr. Washington, your position at the CIA makes you uniquely qualified to understand both security needs and civil rights. How you balance these concerns?" Maya smiled. "Senator, they're not opposing forces. When we treat every citizen with respect and follow proper procedures, we actually make our communities safer. Officer Barrett, could you share your perspective on this?" Barrett walked to the witness table, his nervousness hidden behind years of police training. 6 months ago, he had been the face of police bias. Now he was helping to eliminate it. "Distinguished members," he began, "I was that officer who let prejudice cloud my judgment. But through Dr. Washington's program, I learned that good policing isn't about assumptions. It's about procedures, respect, and community trust. Today, I train other officers to recognize and overcome their biases." The hearing continued for hours, with various experts and officials testifying about the program's impact. Officer Chen spoke about how the new technology had made her job easier and safer. Community leaders described the improved relationship with law enforcement. Meanwhile, back in Georgetown, the changes were visible on every street. Police officers chatted easily with residents, children waved at passing patrol cars, and the atmosphere of tension that had once existed had been replaced by a sense of mutual respect. Later that evening, after the hearing, Maya hosted a small gathering at her home. Barrett, Chen, Rodriguez, and other key figures from the program were there. The formal boundaries of rank and position had faded over the months of working together. "I got word from the White House today," Maya announced to the group. "The president is signing an executive order tomorrow. Our program will be implemented nationwide with full federal funding." Cheers erupted from the gathering. Barrett raised his glass in a toast. "To Dr. Washington," he said, "who turned my worst mistake into the best thing that ever happened to our department." Maya shook her head, smiling. "No, to all of us. Change doesn't happen because of one person. It happens when people are willing to learn from their mistakes and work together for something better." The conversation turned to the future. Plans were being made to expand the training program to police academies. Maya had been asked to write a book about the experience. Barrett was scheduled to speak at police departments across the country. As the evening wound down, Maya walked her guests to the door. The same street where she had once been wrongfully stopped was now a symbol of progress. A young black family walked by, waving casually to the police officers leaving her house. It was a simple gesture, one that would have seemed impossible 6 months ago. Back in her study, Maya looked at a framed photo on her wall. It was from the community open house, showing her, Barrett, and a group of citizens and officers all working together. Below it was a quote she had chosen: "Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best changes." Her phone buzzed with a message from the CIA director. "The president says you've done more for national security by building trust between police and communities than a dozen covert operations could have achieved." Maya smiled, knowing that real change was finally happening. The incident that could have divided a community had instead united it, creating a model for the entire nation to follow. As she prepared for another day of balancing CIA duties with police reform work, she felt satisfied knowing that her worst experience as a black woman had led to better experiences for countless others.